On Sunday, June 18, 1815, a muddy field near Waterloo became the stage for one of history's most consequential battles. This was not just another clash in the long Napoleonic Wars. It was the final test of Napoleon Bonaparte's return to power after exile, and the moment Europe decided whether his empire would rise again or collapse forever. The battle was fought in what was then the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, today Belgium, near the village of Waterloo and the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean. On one side stood Napoleon and the French Imperial Army. On the other stood two coalition forces, an Anglo-Allied army under the Duke of Wellington, and a Prussian army under Field Marshal Blücher. Waterloo became famous because it ended more than a campaign. It ended an era. To understand Waterloo, you have to begin with Napoleon's dramatic return in March 1815. After being forced into exile on the island of Elba, he escaped, landed in France, and regained power with astonishing speed. This short comeback became known as the 100 Days. But the rulers of Europe had no intention of letting him rebuild the French Empire. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, and other powers formed the Seventh Coalition and began mobilizing armies. Napoleon knew time was against him. If all these enemies assembled together, France would be surrounded by overwhelming force. His only realistic chance was to strike quickly, defeat nearby armies separately, and create enough shock to force political hesitation among his enemies. Napoleon's immediate targets were Wellington and Blücher. Their armies were positioned close to France's northeastern border, but they were not yet fully united. Wellington commanded a mixed force that included British, Dutch, Belgian, Hanoverian, Brunswick, and Nassau troops. Blücher commanded the Prussian army, experienced and determined after years of fighting the French. Napoleon's plan was classic divide and defeat. He would drive between them, prevent them from supporting each other, crush one army, then turn against the other. The strategy was bold and not unrealistic. Napoleon had built his reputation on speed, concentration, and attacking enemies before they could coordinate. But in 1815, every hour mattered, and every delay created danger. The campaign opened on June 16 with two connected battles, Ligny and Quatre-Bras. At Ligny, Napoleon attacked the main Prussian force and won a tactical victory. The Prussians suffered heavy losses, but they were not destroyed. This detail mattered enormously. They withdrew in good order, meaning they remained organized enough to fight again. At the same time, French forces fought Wellington's troops at Quatre-Bras. The goal there was to stop Wellington from reinforcing Blücher. Wellington held his ground, but he could not save the Prussians at Ligny. Napoleon had created separation between the two coalition armies, but he had not broken either of them completely. That partial success set up the crisis at Waterloo. After Ligny, Napoleon made a decision that would shape the outcome. He sent roughly a third of his forces under Marshal Grouchy to pursue the retreating Prussians. In theory, this made sense. If Grouchy could keep Blücher away from Wellington, Napoleon could face the Anglo-Allied army alone. But the Prussians were not simply fleeing in panic. They were moving with enough discipline to remain a threat, and they were still committed to supporting Wellington if possible. Grouchy's pursuit led to the separate fighting around Wavre on the 18th and the 19th of June. The crucial consequence was that those French troops were absent from Waterloo, while the Prussians were still able to march toward the battlefield. Wellington chose his defensive position carefully. He placed his army along the Mont Saint-Jean ridge, across the Brussels road, south of Waterloo. The ground gave him advantages. His troops could shelter behind the crest, reducing their exposure to French artillery. Strongpoints such as Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte helped anchor the line and force the French into costly attacks. Wellington was not trying to destroy Napoleon in a brilliant offensive maneuver. His objective was to survive long enough. He knew Blücher had promised support, and that knowledge changed everything. If Wellington could hold the ridge through the afternoon, the Prussians might arrive on Napoleon's flank and turn a hard battle into a disaster for France. The battle began under difficult conditions. Heavy rain had soaked the ground, making movement slow and reducing the effectiveness of artillery. Napoleon delayed his main attack, likely hoping the terrain would dry enough for cannon and troops to move more effectively. But delay helped the coalition as well, because every passing hour gave the Prussians more time to approach. When the French attacks came, they were intense and repeated. Hougoumont became a brutal struggle that consumed French attention and manpower. The fighting there was meant to pressure Wellington's right, but it turned into a costly fixation. Across the battlefield, Napoleon needed a breakthrough before the Prussian threat became impossible to ignore. One of the key struggles centered on La Haye-Sainte, a farmhouse near the middle of Wellington's line. Its position made it tactically important because it sat close to the road and helped shield the Allied center. French forces fought fiercely to capture it, while its defenders resisted under growing pressure. As the day wore on, ammunition shortages and relentless attacks weakened the defense. When La Haye-Sainte eventually fell, Napoleon gained an opening against Wellington's center. French artillery and infantry could now threaten the Allied line more directly. For a moment, the battle seemed to tilt toward France. Wellington's army was under severe strain, and the outcome was still genuinely uncertain. Meanwhile, the Prussians were arriving. This is the turning point that makes Waterloo different from a simple duel between Napoleon and Wellington. Blücher's men began pressing against the French right flank, forcing Napoleon to divert troops away from the main attack. The French now faced a worsening problem. They had to break Wellington in front while containing the Prussians on the side. The village of Plancenoit became a fierce battlefield as French units fought to hold back the Prussian advance. Napoleon's army was still dangerous, but its options were shrinking. The arrival of around 50,000 Prussians transformed the battlefield from a frontal contest into a tightening coalition trap. By evening, Napoleon reached for his last great reserve, the Imperial Guard. These elite infantry battalions had an almost legendary reputation. They represented not just military strength, but the prestige of Napoleon's rule itself. Sending them forward was a gamble, but also a necessity. If the Guard could punch through Wellington's weakened line, the French might still win before the Prussian pressure became overwhelming. The attack advanced up the slope toward the Anglo-Allied position. But Wellington's troops, battered though they were, held firm. The Guard met concentrated fire and counterattack. Instead of breaking the Allied line, the Imperial Guard was repulsed. The psychological impact was devastating. The repulse of the Imperial Guard shattered French morale. For years, Napoleon's armies had been built around the belief that his leadership and elite troops could still create victory from crisis. At Waterloo, that belief collapsed in real time. As the Guard fell back and the Prussians continued breaking through on the French right, the army began to unravel. What had been a hard-fought battle turned into a rout. Soldiers who had endured hours of combat now saw no path to recovery. Wellington ordered a general advance, and the coalition forces pressed forward. The French army, caught between exhaustion, panic, and enemy pressure, disintegrated across the field. Waterloo was famously described by Wellington as the nearest run thing imaginable, and that judgment matters. The battle was not inevitable from the first shot. Napoleon had a plan, won at Ligny, pressured Wellington severely, captured key ground, and nearly broke the Allied center. But his failure to destroy the Prussians, the absence of Grouchy's detached force, Wellington's defensive discipline, and Blücher's determination all combined against him. 4 days later, Napoleon abdicated for the second and final time. Coalition forces entered Paris on July 7. Waterloo ended the First French Empire and became a symbol of catastrophic reversal. That is why, even today, to meet one's Waterloo means to face the defeat that cannot be undone. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.